So I just want to say welcome everyone. This is the Boat on Course training discussion. Today we're going to be talking about Rule 6, which is safe speed. And I really appreciate all of you diehard captains, navigation experts, educators, others who are joining us today on this I'm in the northern part of the country, so our boat is winterized, put away, but I recognize that you're calling in from all over, and I just want to really say thanks for joining us for this session and a deep dive into this topic. My name is Pamela Dillon, Captain Pam, as Peg Phillips, the executive director, wants me to refer to myself as. Um, I've been involved with boating and boating education for many, many years. To summarize my background, I like to say I help save lives by developing and implementing national standards and best practices of boating safety. I am a Coast Guard licensed captain, only at the OUPV level, but that's the only level I really needed or had the opportunity to capture. I am a National Safe Boating Council instructor trainer. I have served as staff on the National Boating Education Standards panel. Did that for over a dozen years. I served 2 terms on the National Boating Safety Advisory Council. Am past chair of the National Safe Boating Council itself. Um, Also, currently am working as staff on the National Association of State Boating Law Administrators. I see a lot of you on this call that may have been on some some committee calls with me earlier today or yesterday. So welcome. I am also retired as the State of Ohio Boating Law Administrator, and I saw Andy Foos here from the State of Ohio. It's always good to see an Ohio DNR person with me here. As a BLA at the State of Ohio, I was a commissioned law enforcement officer, so have done literally thousands of boat boardings, and some of that background and experience I'm going to share with you during this session today, because it really comes into how do you recognize the topic, how do you recognize safe speed, both from a operator's perspective, but perhaps outside of being at the helm. Just a little bit about this session as we get underway. It is going to be interactive, please. While I encourage everyone to remain on mute unless you're speaking, please find that microphone button now and locate that so that you can unmute yourself. It should be right there in your control panel. I think these days most people are comfortable with using Zoom, but with Teams and some of the other platforms out there, the control panels look a little bit different. I also want you to feel comfortable using the chat feature. So there's a little chat button down there on your control panel. Go ahead and find that and give us your name and where you're located. And please share a little bit about yourself in that chat feature. If you're a Coast Guard licensed captain, let us know that. If you're a state law enforcement or a state boating educator or a volunteer with the auxiliary, the power squadron, please share a little bit about who you are in that chat. And everybody will be able to see that, so you'll be able to get to know each other a little better through that process as well. I also want you to find the React button, the React features, because that's how you can raise your hand. If you open up that React feature, you'll see a little button that says raise your hand, but you'll also be able to give a thumbs up or express yourself, thumbs up, thumbs down. Just express yourself using these React features, and I invite you to do that along the way. So let's talk about safe speed. And again, before we jump into this, I see that folks are putting your information in the chat. So thanks for doing that, and continue to do that as we move forward. The topic today is safe speed, and I'm just going to start with a did you know? Did you know from the recreational boating statistics, the most recent version, which is 2024, that excessive speed is the sixth highest known primary contributing factors of incidents. This was actually, as I dug into putting this PowerPoint together, it was actually a little bit surprising to me because excessive speed can get buried in so many other contributing factors kind of evaluations. Maybe somebody had excessive, we're going too fast, and it was attributed to operator inattention because they weren't realized they were going too fast. Maybe there was improper lookout, and it was indicated as improper lookout because they were traveling at a speed that didn't allow them to properly see what was going on. Maybe they were going too fast because they were just inexperienced operators. And, so it could have been a factor in many of these other areas, these other contributing factors that are ahead of it. But if you just look at the excessive speed line, there were 279 incidents last year in 2024 where excessive speed was the primary contributing factor. 26 of those incidents resulted in a boating fatality and 245 injuries from those incidents. So that's quite a depth of unfortunate results, and those are just the ones that were investigated and documented this way. Speed is a topic that we all need to be thinking about. So we're looking at the U.S. Coast Guard navigation rules, and for many of you who are certified captains, you know this rule book and you know these rules very well. It's important though to stay updated with these topics, and I invite you all to visit this link. We're not going to open it at this time, but please, if you haven't taken a look at the most recent version of the navigation rules, you can find that at the Nav Center link on the U.S. Coast Guard. They are available free, so no need to buy or go through expensive kind of courses or schools. These are open to the general public. And it's very difficult to look at one rule without putting it in context with all of the others. This is just some of the content from the NAV rules page. And you can see that safe speed, which is Rule 6, actually is under the conduct of vessels in any condition of visibility. They're under the Part B steering and sailing rules. And those are under the general rules of application, responsibilities, and general definitions. It's important to understand that you can't just take this out of context with the rest of the information that is provided. And as a matter of fact, this page continues through Rule 41, plus there are annexes, amendments, and other associated provisions. So while we're focused today just on primarily on Rule 6, the other ones many times are very applicable, and you need to take those in context. Again, there are a lot of additional responsibilities, and many of these will actually the conduct of vessels inside of one another. Each of these, I believe, are scheduled in this Boat on Course training series to take a deep dive into each of those others. So we're going to kind of, I wanted to present it as a broad net, first of all, to say that you've got to be aware of the other parts of the NAV rules. But obviously, we're going to take a deep dive and just really hone in on what safe speed is. And that is Rule 6. And let's just start by looking at the first part of the definition that you'll see for safe speed. And I'll read it. Every vessel shall at all times proceed at a safe speed so that she can take proper and effective action to avoid collision and be stopped within a distance appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions. In determining a safe speed, the following factors shall be among those taken into account. And there's two parts to this. The first one is to look at these actions, these factors required of all vessels. And then part B, which we will not spend as much time on, but it's equally as important. And that's for vessels that have operational radar. So first of all, let's look at this by all vessels. And I want to get a bit more interactive here. So let me just ask, first of all, what is a vessel? Who can tell me, unmute yourself and share with me what a vessel is? Who wants to share?
Anything that has the means of transporting you on the water.
Thank you. Is that Alan?
It is.
Thank you, Alan. Yes. Does anyone want to add anything to that? Alan had a pretty comprehensive, but there might be some more information to add. Definition of a vessel. So it actually is every description of watercraft or other artificial contrivance used or capable of being used as a means of transportation on the water. So often we hear boaters think that maybe the navigation rules only apply to power boats or traditional types of boats. Maybe they don't think they apply to stand-up paddle boards or a raft that they bought at a big box store somewhere. But the reality is those also are determined to be vessels by definition. And this safe speed in some of those circumstances where you think that maybe those types of vessels may not be subject to it, this rule actually applies to all vessels. And there's a number of factors that you need to be aware of. So the first factor that is listed in the rule is the state of visibility. Who wants to share what we may mean by the state of visibility? What does that mean to you when you see that? Go ahead, raise your hand or just unmute and share. What do we mean by the state of visibility?
Depending on what the conditions are, how far you can actually see across the water.
Sure. Thank you, Richard. That may be how fast you can or how far you can see depending on the conditions across the water. Any other thoughts on that? The state of visibility? Can that change during the course of a day or an outing? Of course it can. Fog rolls in, it gets hazy. There's a lot of glare on the water. It doesn't have to be bad weather conditions that may impact, but it may be just the angle of the sun or glare. Another factor may be traffic density, including concentrations of fishing vessels or any other vessels. What if you have a shoreline concert with a concentration of boats in the vicinity, just listening to the concert, but you still have a clear channel to pass through? Should you care about your speed in that kind of situation? I'm going to start calling on people, so be ready. So, Virgil, I'll pick on him since he's my spousal unit. He's my husband. Virgil, would you care if you had a clear channel to pass through? Would you care about your speed in those kind of situations with a lot of boats just sitting there?
Of course, you would. If there's possible obstructions, a crowded area, buoys, anchored boats, you'd have to slow down. You just can't speed through them like you would if there was an open area.
Well, how about your wake? What's your responsibility for your wake?
Me too. Are you still
Yes.
asking me?
Sure.
It's another basic seamanship rule that we have, that you don't you are responsible for your wake. As you speed through the water, you're throwing a wake, and that wake can cause issues to other boats or property lines and docks and so forth. And so you have to be cognizant of that as you move through the water at whatever speed.
So another factor is the maneuverability of the vessel, with special reference to stopping distance and turning ability in prevailing conditions. Who wants to share? I'll pick on Andy in Ohio. Who wants to share? Or Andy, can you share what you think about in this kind of factor? Maneuverability of the vessel with special reference to stopping distance and turning ability in the prevailing conditions.
Well, depending on if you're in a river or any place with any kind of current, if you got the current at your back or a heavy wind at your back, when you go to stop, you got to take all of that into consideration as you're either approaching a dock or another vessel.
Correct. If you know that you need X distance to stop, and you see that your final destination has activity going on that's going to impact your approach, you need to take that into consideration. You need to slow down. You need to maneuver ahead of time. But what if when you start to slow down, you find that you have a tailwind or you have other weather conditions impacting your approach? You need to be aware of those prevailing conditions as well. And especially for casual boaters or folks that don't do this for a living, they may be surprised at when those prevailing conditions, how they affect their boat. I know that many of us that have taught new boaters, especially in on-water training, that often those prevailing conditions, especially with wind, that learning how to maneuver and handle your vessel in wind conditions is probably the number one lesson that a lot of people come to classes to learn. How do you dock a boat under when you have wind, or when you've got just what and how do you take that into account? And part of that is just understanding and learning how to use, or learning how to really understand what those wind or weather conditions or current conditions, how they are going to impact your boat. At night, who here has operated at night or has a bit of experience operating at night? And so I want you to raise your hand, and I want you to, and Richard, I saw yours go up first. So at night, the presence of background lights, such as from shore lights or backscatter from her own lights. Can you describe what that means for folks that may not have experience in night operation?
So most of ours are enforcement related, so there's not a lot on the lakes or the reservoirs when we're operating, but the light will reflect off of the water and play tricks on you as far as what you're seeing, your distance, and your relativity to the shoreline. So those are things you have to take into account, especially if you're at speed in the dark, as well as the lights that are on your boat. They're going to be casting off as well.
Who would like to add to that? Thanks, Richard. Who'd like to add to that? Go ahead, Scott.
I'm hearkening back to my days on the Cape Cod Bay, and on a dark, stormy night, there's no background light, so easier to see other vessels. And running ferries on Boston Harbor, a lot of background light, so harder to pick out navigation lights on the vessel with the buoys and the city lights in the background.
Thanks, Scott. Anyone else want to contribute to this? You know, if you haven't had a chance to do much night operation, it is a whole new world and it's a whole new skill set. And understanding and just being aware of the influence of shore lights, and as Scott indicated, the the absence of those shore lights and how that can actually enhance your night vision. But also being aware of the backscatter, any light that is coming back into your vision from your own lights. There's a whole skill set that is associated with learning how to operate in those kind of conditions. And I would just encourage you all that to not only gain that kind of experience, because it's really very, very cool to be out at night. But there is a lot to learn. And so slow down, understand, get to know the environment and speed, even though you may be in an area where there are not speed restrictions at night. It's always better to go cautiously, especially if you're just learning the area, to move cautiously, especially as night falls. So another factor in determining safe speed is the state of wind, sea, and current, and the proximity of navigational hazards. I think this was already mentioned, but how does the thought of being in the proximity of navigational hazards, how does that matter? What does that mean to your boat operation? So, Brandy, can I ask you to contribute to that? What would you do? I mean, it may be a logical kind of situation, but what does it matter if there are navigation hazards? Maybe you have a clear path moving forward. And Brandy said she doesn't have a microphone, but she'll type it. So thank you, Brandy, for doing that. Who has a microphone that'd like to share? Patrick, go ahead.
Well, with any hazard, you would adjust your speed, your distance, in case of taking current into consideration as well, leaving you a reasonable space, not being fully aware of what the hazard might be, holding on board.
Very good. Very good. Anyone else want to comment on that? Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. And the final factor that is listed is the draft in relation to the available depth of water. So let me just say, okay, so do you know the draft of your boat? say you know that your draft is 3 foot and you're operating in 6 feet of water. Does that make a difference then? If you know that you've got plenty of draft, what are your thoughts on that?
We've had a number of fatalities and injuries related to folks not colliding with each other or fixed objects, but with the bottom. And so if I'm navigating in an area where I'm getting close to the bottom, and so I'd rather hit that bottom slowly if I'm sniffing around rather than going at high speed and throwing people off the boat.
Very well said. You know, even though there may be charted water that shows a certain depth, we are all familiar with the prevailing conditions. There may be chop, there may be swells, there may be circumstances where you're actually getting pushed out of a main channel, and it's always good to just be very aware and keep a very good awareness of what that depth is in relation to the available depth of water. So these are all factors that the Coast Guard Navigation Rules book lists as things to consider when determining a quote safe speed. And understand that safe speed is subjective. You can be going very slow, but that may be still determined to be too fast because of those prevailing conditions. I'll take a quick look at the second part of safe speed, the second part of that rule, and that is vessels with operational radar. How many of you, is there anyone here that uses radar commonly on your boat? And you want to share? Okay, Brandy does. She doesn't have a microphone. Anyone else want to share just your observations on using radar? Virgil.
I don't currently use radar, but I did when I was in the military. We had radar on our small boats. And the big thing when you have a limited visibility, you start to rely on that radar. And what you have to know or be familiar with is that blip, that item, that little light dot or dash that appears on your radar screen can be a problem. And you just have to, as you move through the water, find out what's happening with that. If it is a constant bearing and it's a decreasing range, you're on a collision course. If you see that blip and it's going away from you, it's then you don't have to worry about it as far as as much as you might think, and your speed would be all right. But if you have a constant bearing and a decreasing range of a radar contact, you need to slow up and find out what's happening and what you may need to do besides slow down.
Thanks, Virgil. And I would add that having radar does not remove your responsibility for keeping that proper lookout and being aware of, the situation and what's going on around you. If you have operational radar on your boat, then you need to understand the characteristics, efficiency, and limitations of the radar equipment. You may not be able to see that blip, but if you see that blip, then you need to understand that it may be pretty indescriptive. You need to be aware of the scale of the radar range. If you might have it at a very long range and perhaps miss some of the detail that's a lot smaller and perhaps closer. So you need to keep that in mind. You need to be aware of the radar detection of the sea state weather and other sources of interference. Not everything is detected by radar. We hear this all the time, especially from paddlers who may be out in plastic boats that may not reflect radar signals very well, and life jackets that may not reflect a radar signal or may not be detected by radar. So especially small boats, ice, other floating objects, just be aware that there may be things out there it doesn't pick up. You need to be aware of just the number, location, and movements of vessels detected by radar. And thanks, Virgil, for bringing up that constant distance or constant bearing, decreasing range concept, because that is very important to understand if you're on a collision course. And if you are, you need to know what you're heading toward and possibly how to avoid it, and more importantly, how to avoid it. And you also need to understand the more exact assessment of the visibility that may be possible when radar is used to determine the range of vessels or other objects in the vicinity. That the fact that it is just a tool and you shouldn't rely on that as 100% of the time, that you still need to use your operational judgment. You still need to get the feedback from those that have eyes in the water and are serving as lookouts, that there is more, you need to take all of that information into consideration as you're determining a safe course and safe speed to move forward. So I want to share just a 3-minute video with you. This is from the Boat on Course website. And this is a video, the only one I'm going to show today, a video that is there to use. And it covers more than just speed, but it does get to the heart of that big picture information on just what is responsible operation. So sit back and let's watch this for 3.5 minutes.
On the road, a good driver must keep certain things in mind. For example, they have to check their rearview mirror to see what's going on behind them. Always check your speedometer to make sure you're not going too fast. Never forget to buckle up your safety belt. And keep an eye on the road in front of you to see what's going on with the traffic. This is the same concept as what happens on the water.
All right, Tina, we ready to go?
I'm ready.
Life jacket.
Check.
Lights.
Check.
Engine cutoff.
What button is that one?
The string.
Okay, check.
And horn.
Ha. Check.
We're ready.
Let's do it. Tim, today we've been talking about all of the things that we can do to be safe in individual situations, along with some of the key principles of the navigation rules. What are some other responsibilities for boat operators?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It is the responsibility of every boat operator to take all necessary action to avoid a collision, taking into account the weather, vessel traffic, limits of other vessels, and visibility. Such action should be taken in ample time to avoid a collision and at a safe distance from other vessels. If there is a risk of collision, rule number 2 of the NAV rules requires you to do everything you can to avoid the collision. When operating a boat, there can be many distractions on the water. It is your responsibility as a boat operator to maintain a proper lookout. In fact, not keeping a sharp lookout is the most common cause of collisions. Be sure that no passengers or equipment can interfere with your visibility. Watch and listen for other vessels, radio communications, navigational hazards, and people involved in other water activities. 5 short blasts on the water means danger. You can use 5 short blasts when you're not certain what another boater intends to do to avoid a collision or if you need help. It is important to provide a safe environment for all participants both on and in the water. Also remember that all hands on the boat can and should be lookouts. Be sure that you let your passengers know that it is their responsibility as well to help keep watch while the boat is underway. Except where speed is restricted by regulation or the waterway is marked by a no-wake or slow-speed buoy or sign, it is critical to find a safe speed that allows the time and the distance to avoid collisions. Remember that a safe speed also means controlling your wake. Watch out for other vessels that are at a standstill and could be affected by it. A safe speed will differ depending on vessel size, maneuverability, surrounding vessel traffic density, operator's navigational expertise, and environmental conditions. Bigger boats have a larger turning radius, so be sure that you take into account the size of your vessel when assessing the appropriate speed. A vessel of any size should take proper precautions to avoid surrounding traffic. In restricted environmental conditions, such as at night, or when fog, mist, rain, snow, or even wind affects visibility, always reduce speed and navigate with extreme caution.
All right. So that's a nice summary of many of the things we just talked about, and it kind of condenses a lot of information into a nice 3-minute segment. So nice job, and that is available on the Safe Boating Council website for you to use. So just to kind of summarize some of the points we've already made, what is Rule 6 and why it matters? First of all, Rule 1, application for inland rules, it says these rules shall apply to all vessels upon the inland waters of the United States and to vessels of the United States on the Canadian waters of the Great Lakes, to the extent that there is no conflict with Canadian law. So safe speed incidents, we've already said that, are a common source of near misses and incidents because operators misjudge stopping distances and they may not understand or fully grasp operator responsibilities. So the core principle is that every vessel proceeds at a safe speed so that she can take proper and effective action to avoid collision. And here's an important point. And be stopped within a distance appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions. So I want to just take a minute to talk about what it is to be stopped, because in teaching new operators, we find that stopping is a skill. It's not only the actions of putting the boat in neutral, but stopping and knowing when you're stopped is an actual physical skill that should be taught. And the Safe Boating Council teaches this under a concept known as, that we call boater's eye. You may know about it differently, but how many of you here, just a raise of hands or a thumbs up, how many of you are familiar with the term boater's eye and the concept of boater's eye? Okay, so a good number. That's good. And for those of you who aren't, again, you can think you're stopped on the water, but still have headway or still have sternway. Your boat, meaning your boat is still moving. So a way that the council teaches this concept is to really, if you have shoreline or objects that you can be looking at, especially to pick out two objects. It's somewhat like a range finder, buoy. Pick out two objects that you can line up with each other, and that may be, a buoy with something on shore. But looking through that nearest object, is the alignment of the background changing? And if it's changing, then you're still moving. You may think that your boat is absolutely stopped, but you are not stopped. And which means as an operator, you can take action to actually bring that boat to a stop or turn it into the prevailing conditions so that you're not being pushed downwind, or you can actually take action to get that boat in a stopped condition. And this is important when you're approaching and those prevailing conditions really start impacting their boat. If you are, even if you're in neutral, but your boat is continuing to move, if you are looking through that nearby piling and you see the background continuing to change, and some liken it like a movie background, it just continues moving, then that boat is not stopped. And that whole condition of developing boater's eye, the Safe Boating Council courses understand the importance of really teaching people what it means to be stopped. And it is it's a really an important concept for boaters to understand. Another important concept for boaters to understand is how safe speed is either monitored or measured by law enforcement. And I'll put on my law enforcement hat as the retired chief of the Division of Watercraft in the state of Ohio, and spent many, many years in law enforcement situations on the water. Well, let me just ask you before we go through this. How would you think safe speed is measured? It's a judgment call. So how do law enforcement officers determine if you are operating at a safe speed? Okay, Patrick, I see your hand go up.
I guess it would be relative to how much speed they're encountering at the time, possibly how much wake, how much time distance between the boat they're looking at and the boat that's coming towards them or away from them.
Very good. It's a judgment call. But it really is based often, if you're in an open zone or an area where there aren't speed restrictions, it's going to be relative to what's happening around that vessel. How else would you monitor or measure safe speed? What other thoughts do you have? What comes to mind? Well, I've got a few things that, Patrick already talked about wake. And first of all, what is a wake? Does everybody understand what a wake is? And the fact we've already talked about that you're responsible for your wake, and that your wake, the damage from your wake can happen behind you. So you may not even be aware of that, but you're still responsible for that wake. It's often from a law enforcement perspective, it's pretty easy to monitor wake violations in no wake zones, because if you're seeing that white cap or that water disturbance following a boat that actually is producing white waves, then they're going too fast. They need to set that boat down, and they need to proceed at no wake speed, which means there are no white caps or no following seas behind them that are visible from a law enforcement perspective. Often safe speed violations get classified as improper or reckless operation, because somebody may throw a wake or swamp somebody out, and it's easier to gather evidence that there's been a violation and call it or label it under a state statute that says improper or reckless operation, because you have the evidence of the aftermath of that. It would be harder to really perhaps charge somebody with a speed violation, because it's hard to target. Many folks are often surprised to hear that it's not that radar type speed enforcement on the waterways is not a very typical thing, because it's not like the highway where you've got, law enforcement stopped and they're pointing down a road that in an area where the vehicle is coming at you at a specific angle. And so those, the radar speed guns that are used often in highways just don't work on the water. They're coming at too many different angles. Many of those speed violations have been thrown out in court through the years because you can't calibrate your speed guns with that kind in that kind of environment. So it really comes down to a visual kind or the aftermath, and often those are classified as improper or reckless operation. Maybe it's an elision with a dock. What is an elision? Are you familiar with that term? Who knows what an elision is? An elision is the act of a ship or boat striking a stationary object. It is distinguished from collision, which is two boats colliding or two boats coming together. So an elision with a stationary object, that could be a dock, a pier, again, those are pretty easy to figure out if somebody was going too fast and they ran into a dock or a pier. And those are classified as elisions. But there may be other ways that safe speed is monitored or measured. Are any of you familiar with any other ways that obviously today with GPS forensics and with so many boats, most of us having cell phones or having GPS devices on our boats, there are ways now for law enforcement investigators to capture that GPS information from your cell phones or from your Garmin systems, from other devices, electronics you may have on your boat, so they can make those determinations from those instruments as well. And even though you may not be aware of it, you're capturing information about your whereabouts every step of the way, and that means when you're on a boat as well. So that is an active way for law enforcement to monitor or to measure. So just to wrap this up as we move forward, common mistakes that boaters make is perhaps thinking that a slow speed is slow enough, not understanding when that risk of collision exists that Virgil was talking about, thinking your vessel has any kind of right of way. There's actually, right of way is not a term that we as educators should be broadly using on the water. There is one rule where a boat has a right of way, and that is a downbound vessel in current. Everything else, it's stand on and give way. And we're going to be talking about that more in future sessions, future trainings. So come back if you want to, if maybe you're thinking that somebody has a right of way when in fact it may not be the case. Ignoring wake effects, particularly around small craft and paddlers. Again, that's a big issue with safe speed. And then ignoring the impact of wind or current on your vessels. So that's not a complete list, but that's some of the common results of those kind of safe speed mishaps. So some of the safety best practices. Hopefully everybody on this call is familiar with these, but always, always, always maintain proper lookout and maintain situational awareness. Even if you have radar, even if you know the waterway, if you're very familiar with the operation of the craft that you're in, it doesn't remove your responsibility from having that proper lookout and maintaining situational awareness. We'll talk more about these again in future sessions. Using clear sound signals when required or helpful. We understand that most recreational boaters don't typically use proper sound signals, but you need to understand them and use them, especially when they are required. And they can always be helpful in most situations. When in doubt, just slow down. You know, in the Safe Boating Council courses, we talk about slow is pro. We want everyone to just slow down and keep control of your boat, especially in those kind of tight circumstances. Maintain your wake awareness. You're responsible for your wake. Understand your vessel's stopping distance and take into account prevailing conditions, and then observe visibility limitations. We've all heard people talk about on the roadway that you might be over driving your headlights in cases where there's fog or there's weather conditions, where you can do the same thing on the waterway. You can just be going too fast that you're over driving the distance or over operating in the distance where you can stop that boat. And we all know boats don't have brakes, so it takes some time to understand how the distance that is required. And you should absolutely understand how to make an urgency stop, but the better course of action is to observe those visibility limitations and drive or operate within those limitations. So the closing takeaway, we haven't talked about Rule 2, but Rule 2 does require every vessel, regardless of your status, stand on or give way status, to take whatever action is necessary to avoid a collision. And this includes departing from the rules if needed to prevent an accident. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that it is everyone's responsibility to prevent incidents or accidents on the water. So, the challenge during these things is we have a very limited scope of the assignment of what we have to talk about. And, when I first got this safe speed as the topic, I thought, what can we cover that, you could read the rule in like 2 minutes. But as I got into it, there was actually a lot of very fine points that I believe should be made to fully understand the rule. So I just want to open it up and see if somebody wants to add anything or ask a question. I really appreciate everybody's participation today. So any final comments or questions?
Okay.
Virgil.
You did a good job, Pam. You covered the safe speed, and we talk about visibility. We talk about conditions of the waters. We talk about the boat itself, but something that we sometimes neglect that needs to be taken into consideration is the operator's overall feeling when they're operating a boat. I mean, there may be all the conditions prevail and you still ran into somebody and you say, well, I was going at a safe speed and so forth, and the officer may calculate it and everything says basically what was the factor? And it was the operator. I mean, if you're not feeling good or you're affected by maybe a medication you're on, or you did have one drink, but you're really not intoxicated, all of these will affect your reaction, your ability, and you must slow down. So a safe speed, the operator has to make judgment on himself as well as a condition. And that's something that we don't talk about enough, but just wanted to throw it out there as a final comment from me.
I appreciate that. Well said. Any other final thoughts?
Yes.
Patrick.
Well, anticipating, as that's a good point, he was just brought up about yourself, but you also have to anticipate what the other person might be thinking when encountering situations. So you have to know what your decision might be, but you have to be aware what their decision might be if you're approaching another vessel or passing a vessel. So just keep in mind the other operators as well.
Well said. Anyone else? Well, I want to thank you again for being here today and just give a shout out on future Boat on Course training sessions. The next session is January 13th on Rule 12, which is steering and sailing. And that's Captain Sarah Lawrence, who I do not see on today's call, but she'll give an awesome presentation on that rule 12 on the 13th. So please, you can sign up at the boatoncourse.com training sessions. You can see all the full list of upcoming sessions that are scheduled. And I know there's a couple more sessions that are still in the process of being scheduled. So check back if you don't see that full list. And I guess I want to end with a quote from Yogi Berra. And that is, if you don't know where you're going, you might wind up someplace else. So thanks for participating in this session on Boat on Course. And as always, there's more information on the Safe Boating Council website. And thank you all for joining today. Thanks for participating, and hope to see you at the next session.